So first half of the question, I think, talked about two things. So the first thing, obviously, I just wanted to give everyone some clarity, and I know many of you did the actual class with me. Bonds are an investment tool where you can actually lend to the government, and they pay you an interest, and they pay you back at the end of a period, and along with other financial assets. So the first thing, I think the Shadrach mentioned something very important just now, and he was even talking about debt, is cost, the cost of debt. And that's what everyone always needs to understand, the cost of something. You know, it's actually a Bible verse. Jesus even said, before you follow me, count the costs. So everything you do in life always count costs, including investing in bonds. And there are two specific costs I just wanted to put out there that people should always pay attention to when making any investment, including bonds itself, is the cost of money. So in other words, the cost of acquiring that money or putting that money away for a period of time. There are only two kinds of costs you can incur when putting money away for a period of time. One of those is interest if you borrowed that money, and one of those is inflation if it was your own money. Because if it's your money, then the other things you could have spent it or used it, but it's losing value to inflation. So the first cost you always have to cover when making any investment is inflation. Just to add to even something that Shadrach had said, when lending someone money, there's a second cost that we always have to take into consideration, and that's risk. What is the probability my money is not going to come back, or it's not going to give the return I expected? What is that probability? That's why you find that small businesses tend to get higher interest rates than big businesses, because they always say the probability this one will not be able to make the investment back is also that. So two of the things you need to start getting to grips with when it comes to assessing your investment environment is, one, understanding how inflation works against your return on investment. So in other words, if you're told if you invest X amount, you're going to make 20%, you need to start utilizing something called real returns. This is a very important thing, because people tend to just look at, I'm going to make X amount of money, and you forget to subtract inflation, because inflation was the first cost. So it's like your cost of doing business. Whenever you make your revenue, you subtract your cost, and then you get your profit. So firstly, you need to subtract is inflation. Second thing you really need to take into consideration whenever doing any assessment of investing is, what is the probability my money is not going to come back? And the way you look at that is you look at variability of return. So that's one thing you have to start looking at. Assessing, is this an investment that makes 20% this month, then 6% next month, then 57% next month, then -3%. That's for lack of a better word, that's almost a bipolar investment. It's swinging all over the place. But if it's making 15%, then 16, then 14, you can almost predict the trajectory. You can see where it's kind of standing, if it's making 9% above inflation. So one of the things you always want to look at is you need to track how things have performed over a period of time. And that's what investing in bonds does. To minimize loss for people, you always want to do that. Now, just to add one extra point when it comes to risk assessment, if you just may permit me, is that whenever people look at bonds, they'll say it only makes 20%. And I always say to them, however, they carry the lowest risk of all investment assets. They don't carry no risk. They carry the lowest. Someone comes to you and says, I'm going to offer you 100% return on investment in 3 months. What's the probability I'm going to lose my money? If you factor that in as a cost of making that investment, you'll start to see almost every asset is the same. When you subtract inflation and risk against the returns being promised against any investment, every investment carries risk. Listen to me very carefully, to everyone. Every single investment carries risk.
And specialists have told us that every investment carries to it some form of risk. So we have to make sure that we go through with a specialist who can advise us on how do we get to this quantifiable number or amount of the risk that is attached to the investment that we are making. He has also stressed the the point of thought about being careful with the investments. One thing that he spoke about in my times that I follow him is to be careful with some of the promises that come with investing. Someone tells you invest in e-farming, he calls it, there's no such thing. So we have to be careful, especially as young business people who want to build certain portfolios with the things that we invest in.